Hi, this is Michael Carlin, president of Henry & Horn Wealth Management with your Manage the Funds podcast. Could not be more excited today, joined by Leslie Satterley of Woodnick Law.
Morning.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
You know, this is a big day. This is a big day for us and for podcast listeners. We've got a deep dive to explore, so deep that we're going to have to break this into two parts. Most of our clients are business owners.
Yeah.
And the business owners, face an unfortunate reality because many of them are married, many of them go through divorce, and virtually none of them are prepared for what's in front of them. And what my hope is today, is that we can start to lay the foundation of some of the things to think about before, during, and after that whole thing about owning your own business and how to prepare better for that divorce. So, with that, let's talk about Leslie for just a second. There's so much to say.
So much.
I know. There's so much information. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So I learned what a judge pro tem is. That's you fill in as that role. Graduate of Sandra Day O'Connor School of Law. Super Lawyers Rising Star, State Bar of Arizona, Outstanding Young Lawyer, 2011. I got a huge bullet point list. You don't want me to go through them all.
No, I don't. I mean, all the people listening need to know is that I'm a family law attorney. I work with Woodnick Law. We're a boutique firm. We focus on the family. And all I do is family law. So it involves divorces, it involves custody, and a big focus of what I do and the clients that I help are those business owners. So I'm happy to sit here and let you know what I can help inform your clients about.
You got a lot of explaining to do. You got a lot. I mean, because again, not all divorce attorneys, not all attorneys are divorce attorneys. Not all divorce attorneys are really great at what they do. That's why we're super delighted. Not only do you specialize in it, I happen to know that you're great at it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, yeah. So let's get into some of the unfortunate and necessary divorce statistics. Okay, so the latest results that I see, nationally divorce rates, for first marriages is somewhere between 40 to 50%, and I've seen a lot that shows it, somewhere in that 45.5% range. That's the average divorce rate. And the divorce rate goes up significantly for those who are in your second or third marriages. And statistics show approximately 60 to 67% of second marriages fail. And if you think that's bad, try getting married 3 times, because 73 to 74% of third marriages fail as well. So all of those numbers aren't great, but what is challenging to me is that the vast majority of our listeners happen to be focused in Arizona. It's a great place to live. The weather's terrific. But we live in a state where we have among the highest divorce rates anywhere in the country. More than 60% plus of marriages here end in divorce. I mean, so statistically speaking, Leslie, this is a nightmare.
Yeah, unfortunately, statistically speaking, it's something that everyone who's married also needs to kind of keep in the back of their heads. Hopefully it's something that they never do have to worry about, but it's something to plan for, especially if you are a business owner as well, because you have more than just a W-2 income that you're protecting. You have your business. You have what you've been living your life to build up for. So you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, because I think people who own a business may forget that there's a difference between someone that earns a really nice living and they get a really nice paycheck and then a divorce happens versus a business owner that earns the same living as that employee who's getting a divorce, but because they own a business, there's a whole heck of a lot more to that process. It just isn't as simple.
Right. That's exactly correct. So we could have on paper someone who looks exactly the same from an income point of view, but their divorce is going to look substantially different. We've done divorces that range from people who are sole proprietors, insurance agents, to people in law firms, to people who own manufacturing businesses. It runs the gamut. It's professional practices as well. Even those sole proprietors, those people who are working from home, they think, hey, look, if I stop working, there's no value to there's no business, there's no value.
Not a chance.
It's not the case,
No
unfortunately, in Arizona. So, that's even something to be mindful of.
Right, because, if you think about it, I think that the way some business owners think about it is they say, well, if that's the case, I'll just shut my business down and I'm just going to start a new one. But it just doesn't always work like that. I mean, because I guess if it did, then everyone would do it. Is that the thinking?
Right. We refer to that as trying to bluff the nuclear option. I'm just going to stop working.
Right.
I'll do something else later. The problem is that the court can look at what were you doing before, and there is a value to that. And now you've intentionally stepped away from that, and it's almost like a waste of a community asset, which is actually a legal term, community waste. They could still put a value on it. You could still have to pay half of it to your soon-to-be ex, and then on top of that, they could say, well, you were also making income. We're going to impute that income back to you, and now you're in real big trouble.
Right. So you're saying that somebody, again, so they own a business, they're going to shut it down, and they're going to attribute no value to it because they're shutting it down, and they'll just start a new one. But the judge can still go back and attribute a value to this business that is horrible.
Yeah. Well,
for that particular business owner.
Exactly.
But also, to the same degree, I feel like that's the only right way for the other spouse to protect themselves from just being railroaded.
Right. And that really is the issue. I mean, it comes down to equity and fairness in Arizona. So yes, a business owner could do that, but then the spouse is going to be in a world of hurt because they have been there all along during the marriage to help build it up. Even if it was because they were taking on different duties in the household or raising kids and not necessarily in the nitty-gritty of the business. So they are entitled to it. That's the way Arizona law works.
Right. So it's this kind of fair and equitable, which to me feels right. Is there anything to be said about kind of the historical precedent? Because to me it seemed like years and years and years ago, historically speaking, the guys in these divorces would get away with all kinds of different things, and those laws and rules have changed to kind of sway back to be more fair. Is there truth to that?
Yeah, and that might actually be one of the reasons why here in Arizona, with community law principles and being a newer state, so to speak, than other places in the country, I mean, it's just always really been that way here, where you're looking at anything accumulated during the marriage as community property, and that will be divided more or less equally. Right. And then there's this notion of support on top of it, which could quite frankly be a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
It almost is. It kind of is, because this one's just on business owners. The next one that we do will be more on the individuals, dealing with the individual side. So we will totally, absolutely dig in and get to that. So you own a business, and before you get married, all right, I own a business. I'm gonna get married. From what I understand, and I've been through divorce myself, so I get it. But help us walk through some of the things that you think we need to do first before we go ahead and leap in and get married and all of that stuff. Right.
Well, the number one thing that I recommend for anyone thinking about getting married is talk to your fiance about finances. I mean, really, you need to understand and be on the same page as far as how money is going to work during the marriage. For protecting your business, because you have one that started, it was started before the marriage, that is going to be separate property, but it doesn't mean that it's going to forever and always stay your separate property without any kind of community interest in it once you get married. So if you're really concerned about that, strongly consider a prenup. That's one thing that you really should be looking at.
Okay, so that makes most people break out into a sweat, right?
Absolutely.
But so how do you start this? I understand how to start a conversation on finances, but how do you start the conversation on finances from your perspective, from the divorce lawyer perspective? Is there like a magic technique?
I get it. Yeah. Honey, I love you. Will you please sign this prenup? I know it's not very romantic.
Because if that was the advice, I'm like, okay, all right, that might work. But
no, but I think starting the conversation about finances and say, hey, look, I have this business here. I want to be fair with everything, but I also don't want there to be this looming disaster on the horizon if something ever happened to our marriage. And hopefully it's a piece of paper that we're negotiating and signing and never, ever, ever have to look at. But I want to make sure that we both both understand what's going to happen later on if it doesn't. I mean, I think you just got to kind of approach it from that point of view.
Yeah, it's just it's not very romantic.
No,
but
it's not.
It's not. Okay, but all right, this is not the romance podcast. That's not, this is what to do if you own a business and you're going to prepare yourself for divorce. Okay,
well,
so you got to have that.
You're talking to a divorce attorney. It's really not the romance podcast.
I know, and I'm the finance guy. It's really, I know, it's definitely not.
Okay, don't take relationship advice from either of us.
I know, that's basically what we're saying. But financial advice and legal advice,
yes.
Generically speaking, is what we're here for.
Right.
So again, we've got a whole bunch of different things. So hopefully you've had the conversation beforehand. Hopefully you've been able to spend some time getting something drawn up, and you would need a lawyer to get it drawn up.
Correct.
Where you're going to lay out the rules of the road for the business and things like that. So hopefully that's happened. And, unfortunately, now in this, as we kind of evolve the conversation, it's like, well, goodness, divorce is approaching. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that the first things first is that it probably matters how long you've been married to some extent if you're a business owner, or is it just one of those things that's not really much of an issue?
So let's talk a little bit more about your example that you had just a couple minutes ago about you owning a business before you get married. So let's say you have that business, it's up and running, you get married, it's still up and running, and it's still going, and it's still in place at the time that a divorce is looming on the horizon. That business, because it was started before the marriage, will stay your sole and separate property. The problem is that there's going to be a potential community component to the growth of that business.
I knew you were going to say the growth.
Yes.
Yep.
So there's actually a case here in Arizona, the Ruschenberg case. So if you're headed for divorce and you have a business, you should familiarize yourself with that case. Essentially what it is, look, did that business during the marriage grow because of natural market forces, or was there any community effort that was put into the business during the marriage? Whatever was a portion to the community effort, so to speak, is going to be what the community interest is in that business.
Yeah, but community effort, so if you're the business owner, you'd say, well, community effort, I mean, that seems a little vague. I mean, how do we make that? What's the practical meaning of community effort? Because I understand what it means. But anyway, take us through that.
I mean, it could be so much as you're still getting up every morning and you're going to the business and you're working on it, or you're investing more into it, or you're, doing things that are a more active role in the business. Any work or effort that you're putting into it during the marriage really is community effort, even if it's just you, not your spouse.
But what is it? What is if the spouse doesn't go to the office?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Does not matter.
That's effort. That's community. It's a different form of community effort.
Correct.
Because that business owner would need to be, again, we're presuming that the other spouse is home, maybe or maybe not taking care of the kids and doing those other kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So we're assuming that's the community effort, and that gets you entitled in some cases to 50% of the growth of the business.
Correct. And so you can see the complexities that start to come into place. If you're figuring that out and you're trying to parse that out, you need to figure out how much was the business worth at the date of marriage, how much is it worth at the divorce, and then how much has it grown in the interim, and what portion of it is active versus passive, so to speak.
So wait, did we work out how much the business was worth in the first step before the marriage was?
So
did we do that? Is that part of it?
More or less, if you could try and at least get the documentation in place that would be able to establish that later on.
Here are the revenues. Here's the EBITDA.
Right.
We're going to take a snapshot of the finances.
Keep that stuff. And I mean, honestly, even more so from a business, on all of your assets, make sure you have that information, because trying to reconstruct it if you have a 10, 15, 20-year marriage, that's hard to do.
Right, because you know how long banks keep your statements.
Usually 1 day less than what you need.
You say, okay, I say 7 years.
Yeah.
It's like, so banks, and if let's say you have your money at with our firm or JP Morgan or Wells Fargo, and your assets were to have transferred, if your assets are no longer there, those institutions may not even keep it 6 or 7 years.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay. So again, let's hear what Leslie said. You're establishing the value of the practice. You are keeping your books and records. You are keeping copies of statements, and as a part of that, you're really starting to understand some of the money that's gone into the business and some of the money that's gone into those accounts. Should we start to unpack that whole? Again, this is from a business owner's perspective. I guess we'll keep it this one just to money that's gone into the business.
Right. Right. Yeah. So money that's gone into the business. I mean, again, there's going to be arguments that has increased the value for one reason or another. And, honestly, if you have a business where you're starting to invest a lot more, it can start to take on different forms as well. Maybe it's you've taken on another aspect of the business. You've renamed it. You've reorganized it. You got to keep records of all that stuff and be careful with what you're doing. So as you're doing this during the marriage, make sure you're consulting with your financial planner. I mean, I hate to say that you should be consulting with the divorce attorney all along the way when you're happily married, but things to keep in mind.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I know you're right. But wow.
Again, unromantic. No. I'm sorry.
So a client owns their business before they get married, and they're married for 7 or 8 years, and so. In terms of money that's gone into the business, is that something that is vitally important to keep track of in terms of, we can show that every year they reinvested they could have taken more income out, but instead they put $100,000 in. Is that somehow that's evidence?
Right. And that's where, sometimes then the forensic accounting gets involved. Where did that money come from? Did that money that was reinvested come from separate property or from profits from separate property? Or did it come from new community money or money that was made strictly during the marriage from joint, efforts? So it really becomes an issue of figuring out where the money is coming from. The more you could keep everything segregated into separate buckets, the separate property created the separate profit, that separate profit went back into that separate property. That keeps it cleaner. But
how do you? Okay, wow.
Unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen often enough. It would almost. It goes beyond not being romantic. It is one of those things that's like, it must feel. It would probably. How many clients have you seen that have operated in a way where they say, I wasn't sure if this marriage is going to work, and I've always been tracking it with the soul. And does that happen ever?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Honestly, even when people have prenups, it's hard to get them to follow the terms of the prenup. You just got to be diligent about managing and watching your finances.
So when a business owner has a prenup, it's a little bit different, or is it the same kind of process that you would take with or without a business owner?
It could be, if you have a prenup with a business, it could be completely different. It could be a game changer for the business owner because you could very clearly say this business is forever and always 100% the business owners, even if there's profits, even if I'm working there as a business owner, even if my spouse comes in and helps, manage the books here and there, it's still my separate property. So you can really lay out the terms in a prenup and protect yourself a long way with that.
But how do you make that prenup for that business owner more solid? Because as you said, the prenup, because you have it as business owner, may or may not come to fruition. How do you make that more solid?
Right. So with any prenup, one of the biggest issues is full disclosure. So if you want to make that prenup enforceable, you need to make sure that there's full disclosure so that both sides know exactly what's going on. The other thing is both parties need to have independent counsel. So that's a huge thing. Make sure that both soon-to-be spouses have consulted with their own independent attorney about this and understand it.
Because most that spouse will say, the one who doesn't know the business will say, listen, I trust you. It's your business. In the beginning, that's kind of what's said, right?
Right. And that's where you need to insist, no. You need to go talk to someone, find an attorney, have them review it. I want to make sure that you understand what's going on. And so hopefully there is that independent review that's going on.
Okay.
The other big thing, try not to get it signed on the way to the chapel. You want to try and get it done and negotiated enough time where there's not going to be an argument that it was coerced or that there's duress. If you don't sign this, I'm not going to show up, in 5 minutes at the altar. That would be bad news.
I thought that's what the tray table was for on the airplanes, is that you put the tray table down and then you put no, that's not okay, that's not what it's for.
Yeah, no.
All right, no, got it. So divorce is approaching, you're there, you're kind of, at that point, I guess we got to figure out, because you're a business owner, there's two, in my opinion, and from what I have seen and experienced, there's two major things and decisions you got to make. Am I going to do mediation, or am I going to do more of that litigation route?
Right.
In owning a business, as a business owner and having clients that own their own business, it's an extra burden because you're not just earning an income, but you're taking care of employees, you're taking care of clients, you are trying to move your company forward. And so those people that may think, well, I'm just going to litigate this thing to death. I mean, one of the things I would encourage people to think about as a business owner is the emotional toll that litigation can take versus the on a scale, the relative emotional ease by comparison of a mediation. So
right. I'm a big proponent of mediation. Mediation, especially for business owners or the high asset clients, is beneficial in many ways. One, you can keep things a lot more private in mediation, which is a big deal for business owners and people with a lot of assets. They don't want all their dirty laundry aired in something that could be a public record. So that's a big deal. The other one is that you can dictate the timeline a little bit better. With litigation, for better or for worse, it actually is going to be a more drawn out process by the time you get full on trials and hearings, especially in Maricopa County. They're very crowded dockets. The judges have 900 so odd cases assigned to them at any one time. So the likelihood that they have sufficient time and enough time to really understand your business is low. I mean, it really is. So mediation, you could pick a mediator who has a lot of experience in divorce and high asset cases, and that can be very beneficial to moving the ball forward and getting a resolution.
Right. So let's agree that mediation works on a lot of levels, but let's put ourselves in the shoes of the spouse that doesn't own the business, and they're dealing with this business owner that's being a A-type entrepreneurial personality, domineering, railroading, steamrolling. Are there cases where maybe that spouse just needs litigation because mediation, maybe it won't work for that person, or right. am I not looking at that quite right?
That's definitely one aspect. I mean, each case is unique, so there's pros and cons to both routes. Mediation is it takes two to tango approach. I mean, it does. Right. You need to have both parties who are acting somewhat reasonably in order to make that work. So sometimes, even if someone is very motivated to go to mediation, you still end up in litigation because you can't reach an agreement. The litigation route also might be necessary because there's just completely unrealistic expectations from one party or the other. It could be a power struggle sort of issue like you insinuated. The thing with the spouse that is not the business owner is that they should really be pushing for a business valuation. If they're concerned that they don't have sufficient information, that they don't understand the business, that they don't really know what the value is, a business valuation is the way to go, whether it's court-ordered or it's agreement by the parties that there's going to be a business valuation done, because then you have an expert looking at everything and giving their opinion as to the value of the business. And that's the starting point really for negotiation and mediation or litigation.
Right. And that's frankly what we run into a lot, because when we get involved in divorce cases, typically we end up working with the spouse that doesn't own a business, who essentially needs to go out and establish a whole new team of professionals behind them to get prepared, because they're saying, I don't even know what I don't know. Right. I just know that this business is going. My spouse says that it isn't worth anything. My spouse says that I'm not entitled to it, and it's so that's we get involved often in those kinds of situations where we say, well, hold on, let's just take a step, let's breathe, take a step back, and then really start to look at this from a big bird's eye perspective. But right. So again, mediation still likely is the best place for anyone to start, because it gives you the best opportunity for things not to get crazy. Right.
Or at least try and find attorneys who realize the cost benefit of taking different approaches in a case. So in an ideal world, both parties have attorneys who can come together and discuss, hey, look, this is how we're going to move forward with establishing the business, with exchanging information and business records and financial documents. And you're working towards that. But yeah, again, two to tango here. You can't always control what's happening on the other side.
You can, and if you are, considering hiring an attorney, listeners, hiring an attorney that is looking for blood, understand that comes at a cost. It comes at an emotional cost for the person who signs up for it and the person who is going to have to be facing that attorney, and can tend to complicate processes. And I see that a lot.
Absolutely. And I think one of the good things for any parties who own a business, whether it's the person who is actually operating the business or it's a spouse who at least sees the operation of the business from the outside, at least a little bit, so to speak, is they maybe might understand some of the cost benefit analysis that goes into it. We're going to be smart and make this a business decision because, yes, unfortunately, it is the breakdown of a family and a marriage, and that's very, very emotional. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about the business and the finances, it's a financial issue, and it needs to be treated much more like a business situation than a personal one.
Right. So that's, listen, so you have to replay most of what Leslie says, which is virtually everything that she says in this podcast, especially that. Again, not letting your emotions get the best of you is some of the best advice that I could imagine giving in this kind of situation. I want to spend a minute or two talking about spouses that work in the business during the marriage, because it does seem as though that complicates things in a number of different ways, doesn't it?
It can. It definitely can. So I have been involved in cases where the spouses are able to put those personal differences aside and still be able to, for the sake of the business, continue to operate it while the divorce is happening. The considerations once the divorce is being finalized is who's keeping the business. Is someone going to continue to work there, which usually is a recipe for disaster, but can happen, and I've seen it happen.
Oh, wow.
I know. Or
you've seen a divorced couple continue to work together? Wow.
I know.
Fantastic.
I guess they love the business more than they love the fight, I guess.
Got
you know?
It. Mm-hmm.
Or, is one of them going to be bought out, and at what price? The other more contested issues to be careful of is what happens when you're not able to work together and continue to work in the same business while a divorce is pending. There could be a situation where then the court has to get involved with temporary orders about how the business is being operated. Worst case scenario, receivers might be appointed in order to come in. That would be a worst case scenario. But if you really cannot figure out how to operate the business and both parties are doing things to sabotage each other, the court's going to come in to do what it needs to do to protect that asset.
I think I'm beginning to understand better why the court has such a backlog.
Right.
Right. Okay, but help me understand. So we've got this. We've got a spouse that's working in the business that's getting paid. That, let's just assume in this scenario that I'm describing now, that spouse earns a salary and then they're no longer going to be employed by the business, which I think would be more common.
Right.
The business owner is going to continue to own the business. We'll get to some of the other financial settlements later, but the business owner is going to continue to own the business and continue to get draw their income from the business. But what happens to the person that used to work there and draw the salary and that's no longer part of the business? Do they get different treatment or anything special different?
Well, again, part of it can be an arrangement that they're either not getting that salary anymore because they're not working there, and it's instead, while a divorce is pending, turned into some kind of temporary support. So it can work itself out that way. I've seen cases where the salary continues to be paid even though they're taking a less active role. Maybe they're working from home a little bit more to make it a little bit easier. But again, when you have these situations where both parties are involved in the business, the other big thing for a business owner to consider is how are you going to inform when and if you're going to inform your business and other employees about what's going on, because you certainly don't want there to be any issue with them feeling nervous about what's going on. They leave the business or quit or go elsewhere because they see that there's rocky times ahead, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything as amicably as possible and as smartly as possible in order to really preserve it. Again, preserve the asset.
So what's the best way you've heard or seen a married couple working in the business break it to their employees? I assume an email at midnight on Saturday is probably not the best.
Yeah, that's probably not the best idea.
Got it.
If the parties are at a high functioning level of communication, they would try to keep things completely out of the business, work it out on the interim and figure out if they're still there or not in the business, both working, that is, and then probably let the company know as late in the process as possible because they've agreed to what's going to happen. Now, that isn't always the case. So if there is uncertainty or they don't know, letting them know that the business is still going to go on in some fashion, if they at least know that one party is going to be buying the other out. Yes, there's a divorce divorce going on. We're not going to let it affect the business. Make sure that it's being conveyed to the employees in a
full disclosure.
Yes,
optimistic.
Yes,
positive.
in an optimistic and positive.
Got it.
Don't sweat too much way.
But don't put your head in the sand either.
Right. Exactly.
So, is there anything that we need to talk about regarding that business owner paying themselves a reasonable wage? Because it seems to me I've run into that a bunch with clients where, it's deemed that they weren't paying themselves a reasonable wage, and that kind of impact on divorce proceedings gets a little tricky for business owners.
It does, and it plays into a couple different categories of issues in a divorce context. So one is, are you paying yourself a reasonable wage? And that could be either adjusted or not in a business valuation context. If you're trying to figure out how much is the business worth and you're looking at an income approach, then they might be looking at, well, how much revenue is there at the end of the day? So how much is someone paying themselves? Is it a reasonable salary or not? Could get adjusted. Likewise, if you are having people on payroll that aren't really doing work in the business, that kind of stuff can get adjusted as well too. So keep that in mind. The other place that reasonable salary ends up popping up is figuring out a business owner's income, and that is relevant for spousal maintenance and child support purposes.
Right.
So it really is something where you want to try and be as reasonable and on target as what the industry provides as possible.
Right. So it isn't even about just running a profitable business and earning a great income, because when you go through a divorce, it seems to be everything's put under a different kind of microscope.
Right. And
with making judgments about.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
What was totally fine during a marriage when both of you are on the same page is all of a sudden not fine when you're going through a divorce. So as the divorce is looming, make sure your profit and loss statements are up to date and accurate. I mean, that's going to go a long ways. I've had many cases where there are very small mom and pop shops, sole proprietors, they don't have P&Ls. I mean, it's,
right.
Here's my shoebox of receipts, and trying to reconstruct then what the heck's going on just makes it that much more complicated and complex. So try and get everything in order, keep good records, and be prepared to disclose that stuff.
Right. I mean, and I think you made a great point amongst all of them, where you said, well, something that worked in a business that worked during the marriage all of a sudden didn't work, and said, geez, there should have been more profitability here, and you're hiding profits, and you shouldn't be reinvesting in things and buying these kinds of things. That sounds difficult.
Right. Or even, paying for the car lease through the business is totally fine during the marriage, but all of a sudden it's questionable because it's a fun sports car and it's not really for business purposes. Everything's going to be under the microscope.
Okay, business owners, you got to listen to that. Get yourself ready.
So the other thing that I think is really, really important for business owners, because they have a propensity to want to always sell themselves in their business, right? Like, our business is going great. We have all these opportunities. I caution my clients when they're about to go through a divorce about how optimistic they are about their business to their soon-to-be ex-spouse, as well as to the world. Because when you're looking at the value of a business, they're looking at what are the risks going forward, what's the potential going forward. You want to be honest and let them know, hey, look, there's this pending lawsuit, or I had this regulation violation. Those are the things that are going to help minimize the value of the business, rather than talking about, oh, I have this potential account coming up and it's going to be awesome. And business owners are just prone to doing that. Just be careful. Right.
So act more like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Geez. Wow. All right. Well, that's great data. I did want to spend a moment or two or three talking about buy-sell agreements in the event of a divorce and how they can help. I think that business owners believe that buy-sell agreements are really just between partners, and what happens if a partner dies. Those are the kind of contexts that I think business owners are comfortable with. Certainly no more obvious than with regards to divorce, but can we spend a minute or two talking about what a buy-sell agreement would help to do in the event of a divorce?
Sure. So again, the context that I come about this from is usually cases where the parties are not completely on the same page with things. So if you have any kind of business documents where you have laid out, if there's going to be a divorce, this is how the spouse is bought out of the company, that could work if everyone's on the same page and they agree to follow it. If they don't, and it ends up being an issue in family court or litigation, it is likely that the court will reject that specific term on how you value the spouse's interest because it's not in accordance with the actual accounting principles for business valuations. So be careful about thinking or be wary about relying on that to establish the value of the business.
Aha. See,
Yes.
I knew you were going to say that.
I know.
Not just because I know you, but like, how does that, so you're a business owner. I followed the guidance. I got the prenup, and then we set the business value, and then we set the formula and the schedule and the buy-sell agreement, and then the divorce happens, and how often, in your experience, is that formula then followed perfectly to the T?
Within a buy-sell agreement, that formula, it's rare.
Right.
It really is. I mean, unless it is very, very clearly tied to almost one of the more accounting principles, then it probably wouldn't be.
But it's a good guideline.
It's a good guideline. It's still something that is probably a good idea to keep in all of your business documents.
Right.
Again, because I have seen it be followed, even with, larger businesses where there's multiple locations, I've seen parties agree to use that method.
Right.
But it doesn't always happen that way. I mean, it really ends up, let's assume that there isn't a prenup in place and you have this after marriage document. If it doesn't really adhere to all of the rules for qualifying as a post-nuptial agreement, it's likely to not be followed.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So buy-sell agreement and post-nuptial agreement, two different things, or we need to blend them together to become one?
Two different things.
Okay.
If you tried to get a buy-sell agreement to comply with the post-nup rules, I still think you have problems. There's a case in Arizona where they talked about estate planning mechanisms, transferring assets between trusts, and it in and of itself said if it doesn't actually follow post-nup rules, we're not going to necessarily follow just what you did during a divorce to try and segregate separate property versus community property. So post-nups, similar to prenups, different in that you have a higher heightened duty, fiduciary duty to your spouse at that point. So if you're entering into agreements, you need to have more consideration. You need to still have that full disclosure. You still need to have independent counsel. So it's even harder to enforce once you're married.
Okay, so again, the point here is that you really need to seek professional guidance.
Yes.
At the beginning, in the middle, and in the end.
Yes.
Because your business asset, for those clients that own businesses, again, it's not just about the income. It's about you're taking care of your employees, taking care of your clients. It's about the future growth of your business. It is an entity unto itself that requires a different set of responsibility. And so, you would normally meet with a lawyer for a variety of different things, and I think business owners absolutely need to, when they're getting into a marriage, at several different intervals, find and establish a relationship with a divorce lawyer so that you can start to establish best practices for your situation, because as we covered in the beginning, statistically speaking, most marriages don't last.
Right. And on top of the divorce attorneys, keep those financial planners, keep your CPAs, keep your tax attorneys, keep your business attorneys. I mean, those are all the relationships you're going to need to rely upon because they are integral all along the way, just as you said, before the marriage, during the marriage, as the marriage is ending, and through the divorce. Those are all important pieces of the puzzle.
Right. And so we got to talk about the settlement. So you own a business, and it's as we keep saying, it's different. So you've got this asset, this business asset that has a value, and maybe you just thought of it as a paycheck as a business owner, but it really isn't just that, is it? It's more than that.
Right. And that oftentimes is, I think, the hardest pill for business owners to swallow, because even if a value is put on the business, it doesn't mean that you automatically have that cash available to then pay half of that out to your soon-to-be ex. So where is that money coming from? Again, here, this is where mediation can be helpful because you could be a little bit more creative in how are you paying this off. But you need to be thinking about what other assets do you have that you could offset. Can you give more in bank account money? Can you give more in retirement money? And then you need to figure out the tax consequences of where these buckets of money are coming from. If that's not possible, is it going to be some kind of a judgment that you have and you're paying it out over time? And if you are, is there interest rate assigned to it? And what kind of security do you have in place for it? So, these are definitely things that you need to think about.
Right. So because that's the thing, and I see a lot of cases, and this just may be the experience that we've had, where you get a business owner, they own a home, they have investment accounts, and the business owner keeps the business, loses the home, loses some business accounts, and then somehow, from a financial perspective, is in a very different and worse place than they were just before the divorce went final.
Right. It ends up being the cash flow problem. So
Right.
Absolutely, that's something that you need to be careful about. And that's where all of your other professionals, the tax people, the financial people, they really come in handy with helping you lay out and understand if you're awarded these assets versus these assets, this is what it's going to look like for you going forward.
Right. Which is exactly why getting that business valuation key and critical, and also, as you described, not getting super excited about how great business prospects are.
Right.
Because, again, setting that business value too high could be costly and challenging financially for business owners. So, again, before the divorce goes final, we've gone through different property settlements and all this stuff. Is there any beautiful, nice bow you can put on this thing for business owners other than look out, pay attention, do your best?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind is you have a business and you're successful for a reason. That's not going to end after the divorce is done. So yes, it might hurt in the interim, but you're still going to hopefully have that business and have the ability to make that revenue and income going forward. And if it's something that doesn't make sense, then you look at other options. Can you sell the business? Is this something else that you can do in the interim? But, with the divorce, it's not a happy situation, but our goal at least is to try and get you to your new 2.0. Your better self. And yes, it's going to hurt, but we're trying to get you to a spot where everyone's a little bit happier and able to be, in a better spot, at least in the future, if it's not the immediate future.
Wise words, Leslie. Wise words. Okay, Leslie, partner at Wood & Nick Law.
Yeah, thank you.
You so much for guiding us through this.
Thank you, Michael.
This is going to conclude our divorce special for business owners. And stay tuned, because we are going to bring to you shortly our podcast on how to prepare for a divorce from a financial perspective. And we're also excited we're going to be doing that with Leslie as well. Thanks again, Leslie.
Thank you.